you. I'm calling the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
And Mr Speaker, just to deal with that last aside, I'm sure the people of the far north were very gratified to have that minister in their sphere, in their presence, sort of radiating warmth, radiating sort of esprit de corps and humanity to one's fellow man and woman, as she's known for. Sir, could I deal with some of the points that the Parliament's version of Bear Grylls, the previous speaker, made in his contribution? Sir, I think he may well have been on ice in the North Pole for a tad longer than was necessary, and that may have had some effect on his anatomical sort of, processes from time to time. But putting that aside, sir, he touched, sir, on the bill, which of course Labor will support to the first reading, in respect of its provisions around provisional tax, excuse me, and making payment of provisional tax easier for small businesses. And I do commend the government for that, although, as usual, a day late, a dollar short, late to the battle when the war is almost won. It was very interesting to see the timing of that proposal, because at the time, Labor, well before this government, I was revenue spokesman actually, well before this government turned their minds to provisional tax, we actually wrote and released a policy on provisional tax. A policy which I'm happy to table for the members' interest, a policy which was released publicly, a policy which also had the benefit of being highly detailed, highly costed, and not only that, sir, but we engaged professionally the former IRD Commissioner, Robin Oliver, to go through that policy and vet it for us. And I don't think, and those who know Robin, Oliver will know that there is probably no one in our recent history in respect of knowledge of the IRD processes and policies, no one better matched than Robin Oliver and his history with the IRD. So we went to the best, Mr Oliver and his associates, and asked them to vet it. And our policy, sir, of course, was around flexible tax for business. It was about giving business more control over their lives, making the tax system work for them. So essentially, business could pick their own tax rate, still having to pay ultimately the same or appropriate level of tax, but marry the tax system and the provision of provisional tax to their cyclical businesses, whether it be seasonal or whatever. And not only that, sir, we said we would scrap harsh late payment penalties in respect to provisional tax and raise the level at which provisional tax kicks in from $22,500 to $5,000. Now, the day we announced it, and I have this on very, very good authority, the day we announced it, the sort of Mr Fix-It of the government, I'm told, because there was somebody in the room who told me, Stephen Joyce, called the IRD officials in over the head of the IRD minister and basically said, and I won't sort of, use colourful language, but how the hell are we going to deal with this? Go and do something. Oh yes, that's absolutely true, and it wasn't Chris Bishop that told me, I have to say, to be fair to him, it was not Chris Bishop that told me. And the government ran around, sir, like headless chooks, desperately trying to put a policy together, and to be fair, they came out with one. But they were several months late. It isn't as robust as our own policy. It doesn't give business the full flexibility of the policy that myself and colleagues and Andrew Little put forward, but it is something to deal with, sir. So, again, a policy which has been vetted by the then Deputy, or the former Deputy Commissioner for the IRD, very detailed, and would give a lot of control back to small businesses, sir. So this isn't a bad effort. But it was, as usual, the government sort of had a look at the polls, did a few focus groups, said, hang on, we've been beaten to the punch here, we better come out with some sort of half measure that maybe makes us look as if we're in control and we can empathise with small business, and small business will say this is great. So day late, dollar short, as per usual, sir. And then we look at the provisions around the foreign trusts issue, sir, which a number of members have talked through. Sir, it is interesting, and I know other members have dealt with this point, but it is interesting that, again, the modus operandi that I just described in respect of their provisional tax announcement, sir, was almost exactly the same modus operandi that they exhibited around the foreign trust issue. So, the National Party procedure is, the proverbial hits the fan, we basically deny, so the Panama Papers come out. a lot of commentary around New Zealand's international reputation being tarnished, if not put in jeopardy, in respect of being a world-class tax-paying nation that does the right thing and meets its obligations and is transparent. So you sort of reel the issue out on a pole, like a bit of sort of raw meat, sir. Wait and see if the vultures peck and peck and peck, and then if there's a bit of, if it's going too far, you reel it in, and then the government decides we better actually do something, because the polls tell us, of course, that the public are taking an interest in this, that other embassies and jurisdictions around the world are taking an interest in this, and our feet is being started to be put to the fire. So then, after denying and the government saying there was no issue, there is no damage to our reputation, our legislation is world-class and robust, then we move to a flip-flop, which is, hang on, we better have an inquiry, take Mr Sherwin, ask him to do a report. Big change, big U-turn. Poll-driven, who was the politician who talked about poll-driven fruitcakes? Longy, that's right. Yep, well, it's very apt today, sir. Feet put to the fire, feet put to the fire, put to the fire, sir. Big issue, poll it, focus group it, and then when the pressure's on, we better be seen to do something. And then we have the Sherwin report, sir, and then we have the measures described in this bill. Well, the Select Committee will have to go through and test quite robustly the level of quality of these legislative instruments to try and meet the mark. Because, of course, it was the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance and others who said this was not necessary. It was absolutely not necessary. Day after day and week after week, press conference after press conference, doorstop after doorstop, the New Zealand people were told that none of this was necessary. No need for a report, no need for any action, no need for any legislation. And now what have we got? Well, we've had a report, we've had an inquiry, and we now have legislation. And an admission by, or a finding by Mr Sherwin, of course, that our legislation, that our disclosure rules in respect of existing foreign trusts are quote-unquote inadequate. Quote-unquote inadequate. So, so that's where it sits, sir. So we will support the legislation through to the first reading, but it will be interesting to tease out from officials and from the Minister and others as to the level of quality of these pieces of legislative tools and whether, sir, they will actually meet the mark in terms of ensuring that New Zealand's reputation is preserved and enhanced, and that we are not seen or we are not perceived, or that there is no suggestion that we are somehow doffing our hats as a foreign tax haven, sir. So, sir, I look forward to the debate, I look forward to the scrutiny of the legislation, but I do say to the National Party that the sort of modus operandi of doing nothing, deny, then have a poll, then turn around to a U-turn, and then maybe be seen to doing something, probably did work in their first 3 years, possibly did work in their second 3 years, but it certainly ain't working in these 3 years.